Keep the 500, Ethan Caldwell said softly, his voice barely louder than the rain tapping against the windows. You will need it more than I will. For 1 second, the conference room forgot how to breathe. Then Claire Whitman laughed. It was not a loud laugh, not the kind that came from happiness. It was polished, practiced, sharpened at the edges like the diamond bracelet resting on her wrist. Across the long walnut table, the divorce papers lay in a neat stack between them, every page marked with yellow tabs, every signature line waiting like a small funeral. Her attorney adjusted his glasses. Bradley Pierce, the man standing behind her chair in a charcoal suit too shiny under the ceiling lights, smiled as if he had just watched a poor man mistake pride for money. Claire slid the check back toward Ethan with 2 fingers. $500, written in blue ink. Signed with the same hand that had once held his at a courthouse downtown when they were younger, broken ways that had nothing to do with bank accounts, and foolish enough to believe love could survive ambition. Do not be dramatic, Ethan, she said. It is not charity. It is closure. Ethan looked at the check, then at her. His suit was dark, clean, and a little old at the cuffs. His tie was navy, knotted perfectly. His hair was short, combed with the kind of care that made him seem quieter than everyone else in the room. Nothing about him announced power. Nothing flashed. No gold watch. No designer logo. No driver waiting at the curb with a black SUV that Claire could see from the window. To her, that had always been his greatest failure. He never looked expensive enough to protect her pride. Closure, Ethan repeated, as though testing the weight of the word. Claire leaned back in her chair. Her short blonde hair framed her face in sharp lines, elegant and cold beneath the office lights. You should be grateful, she said. Most women would have made this uglier. Bradley gave a small chuckle. The sound landed on the table and stayed there. Ethan did not look at him. He picked up the pen. For a moment, his thumb rested near the silver band on his left hand, the ring he had not removed. Yet, Claire noticed. She wanted to see him hesitate. She wanted the crack in his composure, the last proof that leaving him had broken something important. But Ethan only turned the page and signed his name with a steady hand. Ethan Caldwell. The letters were calm, clean, final. Outside, Manhattan blurred behind rain and glass, taxi lights melting into gold streaks along the street below. Inside, the room smelled of leather chairs, fresh coffee, expensive perfume, and the quiet satisfaction of people who believed money had already chosen a side. Claire signed after him with a flourish. When the attorney gathered the papers, she reached for the check again and pushed it toward Ethan one last time. Take it, she said, lower now, sweet enough for strangers and cruel enough for him. You are going to need something to start over. Ethan stood. He took the check, not because he needed it, but because refusing it twice would have given her too much of his time. He folded it once, then again, and placed it inside the breast pocket of his jacket. Claire's smile widened. In her mind, that small gesture was surrender. A man folding his last $500. A man too proud to beg and too poor to matter. Bradley stepped aside as Ethan walked to the door, but not enough to be polite. Their shoulders almost brushed. Good luck out there, Bradley said. Ethan paused just long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. Then he nodded. Thank you. No anger. No insult. No warning. That was what unsettled Claire for the first time that afternoon. Not his sadness. Not his defeat. His peace. Ethan opened the glass door and stepped into the reception area, where the city noise softened beneath marble floors and low lighting. The receptionist, a young woman in a black blazer, looked up from her desk. Her eyes changed the moment she saw him. Not with pity, with recognition. She rose so quickly her chair rolled back an inch. Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice respectful and careful. Your car is waiting downstairs. Behind him, Claire had already turned toward her attorney, too busy gathering victory into her designer handbag to hear it clearly. But Bradley heard enough to glance toward the door. Ethan did not turn around. He walked past the reception desk, past the framed skyline photographs, past the brass elevator doors opening without a sound. As he stepped inside, his phone lit up in his palm. One message waited on the screen. Chairman Caldwell, the board is ready. Ethan looked at it, then at his reflection in the elevator wall. The man staring back at him did not look ruined. He looked relieved. The doors closed slowly, cutting off the room, the papers, the perfume, the laughter, and the woman who thought she had left him with nothing. Long before Claire Whitman learned to measure a man by the shine of his cuff links, she had once loved Ethan Caldwell for the way he made quiet feel safe. In their first apartment in Queens, the heat rattled through old pipes, the kitchen window stuck halfway open, and the city came in every night as sirens, rain, traffic, and the smell of takeout from the place downstairs. Ethan would come home late with his sleeves rolled to his elbows, carrying paper bags of groceries and a tired smile that never asked to be praised. He fixed the loose cabinet hinge with a borrowed screwdriver. He remembered how Claire liked her coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, even on mornings when she forgot to say thank you. Back then, she called his silent strength. Back then, she rested beside it. But ambition had a way of changing the shape of familiar things. A few years later, when Claire began attending charity luncheons and investor dinners with women who wore diamonds before noon, Ethan's quiet started to embarrass her. He did not interrupt conversations to mention who he knew. He did not correct people when they assumed he worked beneath someone else. He did not hand the valet keys to a bright red sports car or leave a black credit card on the dinner table like a flag of conquest. He drove a clean gray sedan, tipped well, opened doors without looking around to see who noticed, and listened more than he spoke. Claire began to mistake restraint for limitation. At holiday parties in glass towers overlooking Central Park, she would watch other husbands talk loudly about acquisitions, houses in Aspen, and summer weeks on Martha's Vineyard. Then she would glance at Ethan, standing near the window with a glass of water in his hand, speaking gently to an elderly donor or asking a server how long her shift had been. His kindness, once the thing that made her feel chosen, started to look small under expensive lighting. She wanted a man who entered a room like an announcement. Ethan entered like a thought. He saw the change before she said it. He noticed how she stopped taking his arm when cameras were nearby. He noticed the pause before she introduced him, as if wife and husband had become a line she had to explain. He noticed the way her smile sharpened when Bradley Pierce laughed at his plain watch during a fundraiser in Midtown. Ethan said nothing that night. He simply turned his wrist so the watch rested beneath his cuff and asked Claire if she was ready to go home. She told him she wanted to stay. He kissed her cheek, called a car for her, and walked 6 blocks in the cold because the air felt cleaner than the room he had left behind. What Claire never knew was that the failing company her father had nearly lost in Ohio did not survive by luck. The anonymous investment that cleared payroll, saved 42 jobs, and kept the Whitman name from being printed in bankruptcy notices had come through a holding company Ethan controlled. She never knew because he never told her. He believed dignity did not need a spotlight. He believed love was not supposed to keep receipts. When her mother's medical bills arrived in thick, white envelopes, Ethan handled them before Claire saw the final numbers. When Claire wanted to launch a boutique consulting brand and investors hesitated, doors opened quietly after one phone call from a man whose name never appeared in the meeting notes. Ethan built bridges beneath her feet, and because she never looked down, she thought she had crossed alone. Over time, gratitude became entitlement, and entitlement became contempt. Claire began speaking to him in polished little cuts, never enough to sound cruel in public, always enough to remind him that she thought he was falling behind. At breakfast, she left real estate magazines open to pages showing penthouses they did not need. At dinner, she mentioned Bradley's promotion as if placing a trophy between them. Ethan kept pouring her coffee. He kept asking about her day. He kept hoping the woman from the Queen's apartment was still somewhere inside the woman now checking her reflection in restaurant windows. But hope, like glass, can remain clear even after it has cracked. The night before she filed for divorce, Ethan stood in the doorway of their bedroom and watched Claire pack for a weekend business trip she had not asked him about. Her suitcase was open on the bed. Her short blonde hair was tucked behind one ear. Her phone glowed with Bradley's name. Ethan did not accuse her. He did not plead. He only asked, very quietly, "Are you happy?" Claire kept folding a silk blouse as if the answer required no thought. "I could have been," she said, "with someone who wanted more." Ethan looked at the framed wedding photo on the dresser, the one where rain had caught them outside City Hall, and Claire had laughed so hard her mascara ran. Then he looked back at the woman standing 3 feet away, close enough to touch, already gone. "I did want more," he said. I just never needed everyone to see it. Claire zipped the suitcase without looking at him. That was the marriage she left behind. Not a poor man, not a weak man, but a man she had never truly examined because his worth had never begged for her attention. By the time the ink dried on the divorce papers, Claire Whitman had already turned the afternoon into a performance. She did not cry in the elevator. She did not look back toward the reception area where Ethan had disappeared behind polished brass doors. She checked her reflection in the mirrored wall, smoothed one side of her short blonde hair, and adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist as if the marriage had been nothing more than a wrinkle in expensive fabric. Bradley Pierce stood beside her with one hand in his pocket, smiling at the descending numbers above the elevator door. "You handled that beautifully," he said. Claire lifted her chin. "I handled it years ago. Today was just paperwork." Downstairs, rain had softened Manhattan into silver and gray. A black car waited at the curb for Bradley, its headlights glowing through the drizzle. He opened the door for Claire with the careful elegance of a man who knew when he was being watched. She stepped inside, leaving behind the building, the signatures, the check, and the man she believed had just accepted the smallest ending she could give him. 20 minutes later, they were seated at a restaurant in the Upper East Side, the kind of place where the flowers were real, the candles were unscented, and the server spoke as if every word had been trained. Claire ordered sparkling water with lime. Bradley ordered lunch without opening the menu. She liked that about him. He moved through expensive rooms as if he had been born with a reservation. To Claire, that looked like certainty. It looked like safety. It looked like the life Ethan had never bothered to display. When the waiter stepped away, Bradley raised his glass. "To freedom," he said. Claire touched her glass to his. The sound was soft, clean, almost delicate. "To finally choosing correctly," she replied. Then she placed her phone beside the candle, angled her wrist so the bracelet caught the light, and took a photograph of the table. 2 crystal glasses, a white linen napkin, Bradley's watch near the edge of the frame, the city rain blurred behind the window. She typed slowly, smiling as each word appeared. Finally free from dead weight. She paused, added a small gold heart, and posted it before doubt could interrupt the pleasure. Within minutes, the comments began to arrive. Friends from charity boards, women from luncheons, men who knew Bradley, little hearts, champagne glasses. One comment read, "You deserve the world." Claire stared at it longer than the others. Yes, she thought. She did. Across town, Ethan saw the post inside a private elevator that rose without sound along the spine of a glass tower on Park Avenue. He had not searched for it. Her name simply appeared because the world enjoyed delivering small cruelties on bright screens. He stood alone beneath soft ceiling lights, rain still darkening the shoulders of his coat. For a moment, he looked at the photograph, at the caption, at the familiar bracelet he had bought for her after her mother recovered from surgery. His expression did not change. There was no anger in his eyes, no wounded pride demanding an audience. Only a quiet closing, like a door being gently shut from the inside. He turned the phone face down in his palm. Then, with his other hand, he removed his wedding ring. It came away more easily than he expected. The pale circle it left behind looked almost strange on his finger, a thin memory pressed into skin. Ethan opened a small black velvet box that had been waiting in his coat pocket since morning. He placed the ring inside, not roughly, not sadly, but with the care one gives to something that once mattered and no longer belongs in the present. The elevator passed the 50th floor, then the 60th, then the 70th. The city dropped beneath him. Taxis became yellow sparks. People became movement without faces. His phone lit again with another message. "Chairman Caldwell, all directors are present." Ethan exhaled once, slow and steady, and slipped the velvet box into his pocket. When the elevator doors opened, the hallway beyond was silent, wide, and lined with dark stone. At the far end, glass doors revealed a boardroom glowing against the stormy afternoon. More than a dozen executives stood around a long table, their conversations fading the moment they saw him. Nathan Brooks, Ethan's attorney and closest advisor, stepped forward with a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. "Everything is ready," Nathan said. "The acquisition vote begins when you sit down." Ethan nodded. Through the glass, the main screen displayed the name of the company they were about to absorb, a competitor that had underestimated Caldwell Holdings for years. Beneath it, in clean white letters, were the words, Final approval. Ethan paused at the threshold. Behind him was the room where Claire had tried to reduce his life to $500. In front of him was an empire that had never needed her permission to exist. He straightened his navy tie, stepped into the boardroom, and every person at the table rose. The boardroom did not rise for Ethan because he demanded it. They rose because everyone in that room understood what Claire had never bothered to learn. Some authority does not need to announce itself to be obeyed. Rain moved in silver sheets against the glass walls behind him, turning Manhattan into a blur of towers and headlights. But inside the room, every line was precise. The long table was black walnut. The chairs were arranged with quiet symmetry. A row of tablets glowed beside crystal water glasses, each one open to the same private briefing. At the center of the screen stood the Caldwell Holdings mark, simple white letters on a dark background. Beneath it, the acquisition proposal that would shift hundreds of jobs, dozens of contracts, and several powerful egos before dinner. Ethan took his seat at the head of the table, and only then did everyone else sit. Nathan Brooks placed a leather folder in front of him. Nathan was the kind of attorney who never wasted a word. Silver hair, dark suit, measured hands. A man who could make silence feel like a legal document. The final structure is clean, Nathan said. The trust owns the controlling interest. Caldwell Capital manages the fund. Caldwell Holdings remains the parent company. None of the marital disclosures were inaccurate, because your personal assets were exactly as reported. Ethan opened the folder, but he did not look surprised by anything inside. He had built the structure years before his marriage began, not as a trap, not as a shield against love, but as the architecture of a man who understood that money without discipline could destroy more than it protected. Claire had seen bank accounts. She had seen household expenses. She had seen the ordinary parts of a life he allowed to remain ordinary. She had never asked what stood behind them. When she saw a modest checking balance, she believed she had seen the whole ocean because she was staring at a glass of water. Nathan slid one page forward. Her attorney accepted the settlement. She waived any claim to future interest in entities she did not help form, manage, or fund. The agreement is final. Around the table, no one commented on Claire. That was Ethan's rule. Not because her name still hurt him, but because he refused to turn a private failure into corporate entertainment. He had watched powerful men humiliate former wives in public, using money like a microphone, making entire rooms laugh at women who once trusted them. Ethan had no interest in becoming that kind of man. Pain did not excuse ugliness. Wealth did not excuse cruelty. So when Nathan asked if he wanted any internal note added regarding the divorce, Ethan closed the folder gently and said, "No, her name does not belong in this room." A few directors exchanged glances, brief and respectful. They had expected anger, maybe a sharper instruction, something that sounded like punishment. Instead, Ethan reached for the acquisition report and asked about employee retention, pension continuity, and relocation packages for staff in Chicago and Dallas. That was how he moved through the world. While others counted victories by who looked small beside them, Ethan counted consequences. Numbers mattered, but people stood behind numbers. 42 jobs in Ohio had once been saved because he knew what a payroll failure could do to a family. Hospital invoices had once disappeared from Claire's mother's mailbox because he knew fear had a sound, and it often sounded like paper being opened at a kitchen table. He had never told Claire because generosity that needed applause was only vanity wearing a nicer coat. Yet now, sitting beneath the soft lights of the boardroom, he allowed himself one honest thought. She had not left because he had nothing. She had left because she could not recognize anything that did not sparkle quickly enough. Nathan leaned closer, lowering his voice. There is one more matter. Bradley Pierce is attached to a proposal coming through Caldwell Capital next week. His firm is seeking strategic financing. He may not know the final approval comes through you. Ethan looked at the rain for a moment. The city below kept moving, indifferent and bright. He could have ended Bradley's proposal with one sentence. He could have returned embarrassment for embarrassment, coldness for coldness, a public wound for a private one. But the thought passed through him without taking root. Evaluated on the merits, Ethan said. Nothing more, nothing less. Nathan studied him, then nodded. That was the line Ethan would not cross. He would not rescue people from the consequences of their own arrogance, but he would not manufacture those consequences either. If Bradley's numbers failed, they would fail under their own weight. If Claire walked into a room built by the man she mocked, the room itself would tell the truth. Ethan signed the final approval page, his pen moving cleanly across the bottom line. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline, distant and restrained. Inside, Caldwell Holdings acquired another company before the market closed, and the man who had been handed $500 as an ending continued building an empire with the calm of someone who had never needed revenge to feel powerful. The next morning, Claire Whitman woke to the soft glow of her phone and the clean confidence of a woman who believed the hardest part of her life had already been handled. The apartment was not hers, not yet, but Bradley Pierce had made room for her clothes in the guest closet of his Midtown condominium, and Claire treated that narrow strip of polished wood and brushed brass as a promise. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was waking beneath a pale blue sky, delivery trucks rolling along the avenues, steam rising from manholes, office lights blinking on one floor at a time. Bradley stood near the kitchen island in a white dress shirt, reading an email on his tablet with the stillness of a man trying not to show excitement too early. Claire noticed the change in him immediately. His shoulders were straighter. His coffee sat untouched. "Good news?" she asked, tying the belt of her robe with careful fingers. Bradley looked up, and the smile that crossed his face was almost boyish before he trained it back into sophistication. "Caldwell Capital moved our proposal to final review." Claire paused. The name sounded familiar because everyone in their world wanted it to sound familiar. Caldwell was spoken at charity dinners with the kind of respect usually reserved for old family names and locked private clubs. It was not only money. It was access. It was credibility. It was the kind of door that did not open twice for people who embarrassed themselves the first time. "That is the financing deal?" she asked. Bradley nodded, walking toward her with the tablet in hand. $280 million in strategic backing if we get approval. Expansion into 3 markets: Chicago, Dallas, and Atlanta. The partners will stop talking about me like I am useful and start talking about me like I am necessary. Claire smiled, but not with affection alone. She smiled because she could already see the room changing around her. Invitations becoming warmer. Women who had once leaned away leaning closer. Her name appearing beside Bradley's at tables she had only visited as someone else's guest. She imagined stepping into events where no one asked where Ethan was. No one remembered the quiet husband with the plain watch. No one looked at her with polite curiosity and wondered whether she had chosen down. Bradley placed the tablet on the counter and tapped the email. The final line read, "Final approval will be issued by the chairman following executive review." Claire read it twice, then lifted her eyes. "Do you know the chairman?" Bradley gave a small laugh, too quick to be honest. "No one really knows the chairman. Caldwell keeps that level private. Old money style, even though the company is not that old. Everything moves through attorneys, managing directors, family offices, and those silent little people who can ruin a career without raising their voices." Claire liked the mystery. It made the prize feel larger. She walked to the window and looked down at the city as if it had been waiting for her to choose the right man before offering itself. "Then we should make sure they remember us," she said. Bradley watched her reflection in the glass. "There is a gala next week. Caldwell Holdings annual benefit. Pediatric hospital wing, education grants, veterans housing. All the things that make billionaires look human." Claire turned around. "Can you get us in?" He smiled again, this time with more control. "We are already on the list." By noon, Claire was sitting in a salon on Madison Avenue, a glass of cucumber water beside her, a stylist, smoothing the sharp line of her short blonde hair. She studied herself in the mirror with almost ceremonial focus. Yesterday, she had been a divorced woman. Today, she was becoming something else, or at least she believed she was. The stylist asked if she wanted the cut softer around her face. Claire said no. "Sharper." The woman obeyed. The scissors clicked in small, bright sounds, and with every strand that fell, Claire felt further away from the apartment in Queens, from Ethan making coffee in a narrow kitchen, from the quiet patience she had mistaken for lack of ambition. After the salon, she moved through a boutique where gowns hung like secrets under warm lights. She chose a deep ivory dress, elegant but severe, with clean lines and no unnecessary sparkle. She wanted to look untouchable. At the counter, her card approved with a soft beep, and she pictured herself entering the Caldwell Gala on Bradley's arm, while Ethan existed somewhere far below that kind of room, perhaps counting what remained of her $500. She did not know that 5 blocks away, in a private office above Park Avenue, Ethan Caldwell was reviewing Bradley's proposal with Nathan Brooks seated across from him. The file was thick. The numbers were ambitious. The risks were dressed in language meant to look like vision. Ethan turned one page, then another, his face unreadable. Nathan watched him over the rim of his glasses. "Pierce is aggressive," Nathan said. "Not careless, but very fond of leverage." Ethan looked at the projected cash flow chart, then at the section where Bradley's team had assumed Caldwell Capital would absorb the downside if market conditions shifted. "He wants applause for standing near the edge," Ethan said. "But he wants someone else to own the fall." Nathan nodded once. "That is one way to phrase it." For a moment, Ethan's eyes rested on Bradley's name, then on the guest list attached to the gala briefing. Claire Whitman, Bradley Pierce. The letters did not wound him. They simply sat there, black ink on white paper, unaware of how much they were about to reveal. Ethan closed the file and slid it back across the desk. "Continue the review," he said. "Let the numbers speak before I do." The invitation arrived 3 days later in a black envelope, so heavy it felt less like paper and more like a decision. Claire found it waiting on the marble counter of Bradley's condominium after lunch, placed beside a silver tray of mail by the housekeeper who moved through the apartment as quietly as an expensive watch. Her name was written in white ink, Ms. Claire Whitman. Beneath it, in smaller letters, Mr. Bradley Pierce. Claire touched the envelope before opening it, letting her fingertips rest on the raised seal of Caldwell Holdings pressed into the flap. The paper smelled faintly of ink and cedar, clean and private, the kind of detail only people with old habits and new power could afford to care about. Inside was a single card, black with silver edges, inviting them to the annual Caldwell Holdings Benefit Gala at the Whitmore Grand Ballroom on Fifth Avenue. No chairman's name, no photograph, no personal note, just the hour, the address, the dress code, and the quiet certainty that anyone who received it should feel chosen. Bradley stood behind her, reading over her shoulder with a smile that tried to look casual and failed. "This is it," he said. "Half the room will be money. The other half will be people trying to stand close enough to it." Claire lifted the card to the light. "Then we should not look like we are trying." He laughed softly, pleased by the answer. The rest of the afternoon became a rehearsal for a life Claire believed was finally arriving. She called the boutique to confirm alterations on the ivory gown. She booked a car service instead of letting Bradley order one through his office, because she wanted every piece of the evening to feel intentional. She selected pearl earrings, then changed her mind and chose diamond studs because pearls felt too forgiving. She practiced her smile in the bedroom mirror, not warm enough to invite pity, not cold enough to appear insecure. Her short blonde hair framed her face in a sharper line now, and when she turned her chin slightly, she could almost see the woman she had been trying to become since the first time a hostess looked past her at a charity luncheon and asked whose guest she was. Bradley spent the evening making calls from the living room, his voice low, confident, and polished. He mentioned Caldwell Capital twice. He mentioned final approval once. Claire heard the pride beneath every careful phrase. He was close enough to the prize to speak as if it already belonged to him. When he finished, he poured 2 glasses of sparkling water over ice and handed one to her. "After this gala," he said, "people will understand exactly where we are headed." Claire smiled toward the window, where Manhattan glowed in neat little boxes of gold. Some people need to see it in person before they believe it. She was thinking of Ethan when she said it. She imagined him somewhere smaller, quieter, perhaps in a rented apartment with a view of a brick wall, wearing that same plain expression that had made her feel unseen for years. She imagined him learning, eventually, that she had stepped into the Caldwell circle while he was still outside the glass. The thought settled over her like perfume. Across town, high above Park Avenue, Ethan stood in front of a mirror in a penthouse so quiet the city seemed to stop at the windows. The room around him was spare and exact. Dark wood, cream walls, one abstract painting, a row of tailored suits arranged by shade. He buttoned a white dress shirt, then reached for the navy tie his assistant had placed on the dresser. His movements were unhurried. No triumph touched his face. No bitterness. Only the calm attention of a man preparing to enter a room where truth would not need to raise its voice. On the dresser beside him lay the folded $500 check inside a clear protective sleeve. He had not thrown it away. He had not cashed it. He kept it there for a reason he had not yet named, though part of him understood. Some insults lose their power when they become evidence of someone else's blindness. A soft knock sounded at the open door. His assistant, Morgan Ellis, stepped in holding a tablet. She was in her early 40s, composed, efficient, and loyal in the way only people who had seen a man's private character could be loyal. "The final guest list is confirmed," she said. "Mr. Pierce and Ms. Whitman are attending. We can still revise seating if you prefer distance." Ethan adjusted the knot of his tie, looking at the reflection of his hands rather than the names on her screen. For a moment, the room held the memory of Claire's laughter in the attorney's office, the scrape of the check across Walnut, Bradley's polished little smile. Then the memory passed. "No," Ethan said. "Leave the seating as planned." Morgan studied him with professional restraint. "And the Pierce proposal?" "It remains under review until after the gala." "Understood." She turned to leave, but Ethan spoke again, quieter this time. "Morgan." She looked back. "Do not let anyone brief the event staff about my former marriage. Not one word." Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell." When she was gone, Ethan picked up his black dinner jacket and slipped it on. The fabric settled perfectly across his shoulders. Outside, the last light of evening faded behind the skyline, and the windows turned reflective, giving him back the image Claire had never truly seen. A white American man with short, neatly kept hair, a dark suit, a clean tie, and an empire standing silently behind him. He turned off the bedroom lamp, took the invitation card from the dresser, and walked toward the private elevator. Downstairs, a black car waited at the curb. In another part of the city, Claire was stepping into her ivory gown, believing the night would prove she had chosen correctly. Ethan entered the elevator alone, knowing the night would prove something else entirely. When the applause finally settled, the ballroom did not return to what it had been before. The music resumed, the servers moved again, the chandeliers continued pouring gold over marble and glass, but the air had changed around Claire Whitman. People who had smiled at her an hour earlier now looked past her with polite uncertainty, as if trying to remember exactly what she had said near the window and whether they had been standing close enough to hear it. Bradley Pierce recovered first, or at least tried to. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and leaned toward Claire without looking at her. "We should speak with him privately," he said. His voice had lost its shine. Claire looked at the stage, where Ethan was stepping down to greet hospital directors and donors with the same calm courtesy he had given her when she tried to embarrass him. "You mean you should," she said softly. Bradley did not answer. He moved toward Ethan, carrying a smile that looked newly borrowed, but Nathan Brooks appeared beside the chairman before Bradley reached him. Nathan's presence was quiet and final, like a door closing without a sound. Bradley introduced himself with both hands visible, every word polished, every sentence bending toward opportunity. Ethan listened. He did not interrupt. He did not humiliate him. When Bradley mentioned the proposal under review, Ethan only turned to Nathan. Nathan opened a slim folder and spoke with professional gentleness. "Mr. Pierce, Caldwell Capital has completed its preliminary assessment. The committee found the growth model overextended and the downside protections insufficient. You will receive the formal response tomorrow morning." Bradley's face stayed still, but the color left it slowly. "I see," he said. Ethan gave him a respectful nod. "Build something that can stand without asking other people to carry the risk. Then bring it back." There was no insult in the words. That made them impossible to argue with. Bradley stepped away, smaller than he had entered, swallowed by a room that no longer mistook confidence for strength. Claire watched him go, then found herself alone near the edge of the ballroom. The ivory gown suddenly too bright, the diamond studs suddenly too cold. For the first time that night, she did not know where to place her hands. Ethan crossed the room later, after the photographs, after the hospital director thanked him with tears in her eyes, after the orchestra began a slow, careful piece that made the marble hallways feel even more distant from the city outside. Claire was waiting near the entrance to the private corridor, no longer smiling. "Ethan," she said. He stopped, leaving a few feet between them. It was the same distance as the conference table at the divorce office, but now everything between them felt visible. I did not know, she said. Her voice was not sharp anymore. It was thin, almost young. Ethan looked at her, and for a moment, she wanted him to be cruel. Cruelty would have given her something to resist. Instead, his face held only the exhaustion of a man who had already mourned the ending before she understood there had been one. You did not ask, he said. Claire swallowed. Why did you let me think you had nothing? Ethan glanced toward the ballroom, where names, wealth, power, and charity moved together beneath expensive light. I let you think what you needed to think in order to leave honestly. The sentence landed harder than accusation. Claire looked down at her hands. I made a mistake. You made a choice, he said. From inside his jacket, Ethan removed a small cream envelope. Claire recognized the fold of the paper before he opened it. The check, the $500 she had pushed across the table with a smile. It was still uncashed, protected, perfectly flat. Ethan held it out to her. She did not take it at first. Why did you keep it? She whispered. Because I wanted to remember the day I stopped explaining my worth to someone committed to misunderstanding it. Claire's eyes lifted to his. The hallway lights softened the lines of his face, but not the truth in it. At last, she accepted the envelope with fingers that trembled just enough to betray her. Ethan buttoned his jacket. You were right about one thing, he said. It was enough for a new beginning. For a heartbeat, Claire seemed to wait for more, an apology, an invitation, a door left open by old affection. But Ethan had already given her the only kindness he had left, a clean ending. Morgan Ellis appeared near the elevator, holding his coat. Ethan turned toward her, then paused once more. Take care of yourself, Claire. He said it without bitterness, which made it final. The elevator doors opened to a quiet wash of silver light. Ethan stepped inside alone. As the doors closed, Claire stood in the hallway with the envelope in her hand and the sound of the gala continuing without her. Downstairs, a black car waited beneath the Fifth Avenue awning. Ethan walked into the cool New York night, his short hair untouched by the light rain, his navy tie still perfectly in place, the city shining around him like a promise he no longer needed to prove. He had not won her back. He had won back the silence inside himself, the kind no insult could enter, the kind of dignity that did not shout because it had already risen.